Welcome to Gemara Markings. Today's Shiur is Yuma Daf Ayin Ches. So there was a morning immersion with then Shiur, 19 lines from the top of the Omid, and if you prefer, the 9th wide line of the Gemara text. Before we begin the actual Gemara, let us glance at the side where we have a topic heading, the Nosei, where we've written Pu'ulois Kedei Lehitstanein Hakruchos B'Chashash Rechitza B'Yom Kippur. Different actions or practices will be featured in the Gemara, whereby a person attempts to cool himself off on Yom Kippur. However, there is a problem of washing, of bathing or washing, that is incurred. And when we speak about bathing on Yom Kippur, we saw in our previous shiur that the prohibition is not only an entire body wash, but even part of the body, even a finger being washed, put into water, is a violation of this inui of rechitza. So now we're going to look into the Gemara, seeing different actions or practices or attempts to cool off, but they run into a washing problem. Tani Yehuda bar Grogros. Yehuda bar Grogros teaches the following source: Osu leishev al gabi tino b'yom haKippurim. Translated, it means that it's forbidden to sit on clay. Essentially, it's wet clay on Yom Kippur. Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi ubetina metapachas. It's you can perceive dampness because there is some water that is exuded. Rashi says mekia mayim. There's an exusion of water from this wet clay. Omar Abaye further qualifies it, and not just that there you can perceive dampness, but it's ubetofeach al menas lehatpiach. That means that after contact with this tino, with this clay, and let us say you become wet, you would be able to make something else wet as a result of contact with this. So that as far as Abaye's definition is concerned, if the clay is simply moist to the touch, but if you were then to touch something else after touching the clay, you wouldn't transfer moisture to that second item, it would be okay. Amar Rav Yehuda, muter lehitstanein beperos. It's muter to cool off by exposing yourself to fruits. Rav Yehuda mitztanein bekora. Here we have an example of Rav Yehuda practicing what he preached. He would cool off on a kora. Kora is a type of vegetation. You can imagine a large, let's say, melon or pumpkin, and he would expose himself to that, and that would cool him off. Rabba mitztanein bianuka. Rabba would hold a baby, an infant, that was cooler to the touch than himself, cooling him off. Rava mitztanein bekosa dekaspa. And Rava would cool off through a silver cup. As we go on in the Gemara, you notice these triangles, and on the side, under the Mivneh heading, we indicate that these are a machlokes be'inyan shimush bekos kesef choser. We're going to speak about a silver cup that's partially full. It's de'eno mole ara, so if it's not filled to the top, kedei litztani. What about use of that? So the Gemara explains, Omar Rav Papa, kosa de kaspa mole. If it's a full cup, osir. Choser shari. If, however, it's only partially full, then it's okay. The idea being, if it's full, so just the mere movement of it might cause it to splash and overflow, and then you're getting involved with the problem of washing that we spoke about before. The pachra, that's a cup that's made of clay, a clay vessel. Edi ve'edi osir, both full and partially full, will be forbidden. And why is that? Mishum de mishchal shochil, because clay is an absorbent material, and the liquid that's inside can be absorbed and exuded on the outside. So you get back to the problem of rechitza. Rav Ashi Omar kosa de kaspa choser nami oser, and Rav Ashi is more stringent than Rav Papa, and says that and you notice the dash underlining, we have choser nami as opposed to we've dashed underline here choser nami oser as opposed to Rav Papa where we dash line choser shori. Shori means allowed. Rav Ashi says choser nami is oser mishum de mizdarev, because it could slip. The silver cup could slip and end up spilling the water content on you. And again, it's Yom Kippur, and that would be a problem. So Rav Ashi is more cautious and prohibits even a partially full kosa de kaspa. Zira Bar Chama, this gentleman, Zira Bar Chama, was the innkeeper of a number of different scholars that are named here, and the entire house of scholarship of Kesari. So the Gemara describes him. This Zeira gentleman was Ushbezichnin. Ushbezichnin is an innkeeper. He hosted the Rab Ami, Rabbi Asi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Udekulu Rabbanan de Kesri Have. He was their host, their innkeeper. When they were traveling, they would stay by this gentleman. Omar lay Rav Yosef Braid Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So Zeira, who amongst others he hosted Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he tells Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's son, Rabbi Yosef, Bar Irya, son of wise man, Ta Emalach Milsa Ma'al Yisa, to have Ovid Avuch, I'm going to tell you a positive thing that your father used to do. And we have, bear in mind the numbers that we have here of a Roman numeral 1 and a couple lines later a number 2 with we'll call it a different version of things. So the first version is, Mitpachas Hoyolo, he had a cloth. Be'erev Yom Kippurim, on the 9th of Tishrei, the day before Yom Kippur, V'shora oisu b'mayim, he would soak it in water on Erev Yom Kippur. That's an expression meaning he would wring it out. So it would be a wrung out damp cloth that he prepared on Erev Yom Kippur. And the next day there was still some dampness, but very little, as you can imagine. After all, it was wrung out the day before, and the next day he would use it to wipe off his face, hands, and feet. Erev Tisha B'Av, which is Tisha B'Av itself, the 9th of Av is a day that also has bathing restrictions. So on Erev Tisha B'Av, the 8th of Av, Shoira Oisa B'Mayim, he would soak it in water, L'mocha Mavira Al Gabi Einov. And notice here you don't have him wringing it out. You would then conclude that his approach to Erev Tisha B'Av, or his approach to Tisha B'Av, was one of greater leniency than that of Yom Kippur. Ki also Rabbo Bar Mori Omar. When Rabbo came, he said, Be'erev Tisha B'Av Mevi'in Loi Mitpachas V'shora Oisa B'Mayim. On Erev Tisha B'Av, they would bring him a cloth, soak it in water, Umanichem Tachas Mirashosov, and he would place it under his head, Ulemochor Mekaneach Ponov Yodav Raglov. The next day wipe off his hands, his face, hands, and feet. Be'erev Yom Kippurim Mevi'im Lo Mitpachas V'shor B'Mayim. On Erev Yom Kippur, a cloth was brought to him. He would soak it. V'oisosa Kamin Kalim Neguvim. Again, we saw this expression before. He would wring it out. Ulemochor Mavira Agabi Einov. And the next day he would pass it over his eyes. Omar Lei Rabbi Yankov Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Tachlifa. Ibcha Amris Lon. Rabbi Yankov says to Rabbi Yirmiyah, you told us the opposite, namely, you told us that Erev Yom Kippur, this soaking took place without its being wrung out. The Osivnoch Schita, and we asked on you, we responded to you that that you should be choshesh that maybe tomorrow he'll wring it out. So better to, of course, wring it out Erev Yom Kippur. Here you have a bracketed section, and the structure of this Gemara is fairly unusual because here you have the brackets at the very beginning of a discussion, and there's a reason for this. You notice just at the end of the previous line we have a slash mark indicating that which follows now is a new idea. So you have a new idea, and all of a sudden we open up with a bracketed section. How can you explain that? So we have a note that mentions that the reason for these brackets is explained by Rashi himself in Dibur HaMaschil Zokein. And you'll notice that we have a little star in the Rashi. We're looking at Rashi about a fifth of the way, a quarter of the way up from the bottom. There's a star, and it reads, V'ha lo hacha. This section that is brought here, Mishum Deboy L'meimar, because the Gemara is aiming, is shooting for that which it says at the bottom line, V'su kameboya lahu, ma lotzis besandal shosham b'yom kippurim, because there is a Yom Kippur discussion that appears at the bottom line. However, up till we get to that point, there is a question posed to Rebbe Lozer, and that the oral tradition states that there are 5 instances of immersion in the mikveh on the part of the Kohen Gadol. Into the sugya is the second question. So that's why we have the brackets to indicate that this first section is a self-contained unit, having nothing to do with our topic, our Yom Kippur Inui discussion, but it's brought here as a lead-in. Was part. The Yom Kippur related discussion is here at the bottom line. So, but it came on the heels of a non-Yom Kippur related discussion. So on the side we have a Nosei Mivneh heading. You see the diamond is featured in our margin, and we've written Sheilos She Hufnu LeRebbe Eliezer. Questions that were posed to Rebbe Lozer. Number 1, and we indicate Ketab Sograyim. The number 1 question is the section that's in the brackets, Be'inyan Netilas Rishus Lahatir Bechoros. This has to do with getting permission to rule on matters concerning blemished firstborn animals. A firstborn kosher variety animal, firstborn cow, firstborn sheep and goat, and we'll leave donkeys out of this discussion, that's a separate topic, but a firstborn kosher variety animal is, in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, brought as a sacrifice. It's given to a Kohen, the Kohen brings it as a sacrifice. If, however, the firstborn develops a blemish, it's given to a Kohen, but it's not brought as a sacrifice. Now, nowadays, that there's no Beis HaMikdash, the firstborn animal has no immediate future as a sacrifice. There's no Beis HaMikdash. So however, if it does not have a blemish, it's caught in between, so to speak. It's not here nor there, meaning if it's unblemished, it cannot be slaughtered and eaten either. However, if it were blemished, and we are nowadays, so like in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, you'd be able to slaughter it. The Kohen would slaughter it as a gift to the Kohen and eat it as his own meat. There are additional laws. There's a whole Masechta called Maseches Bechoros. We're not here to go over all of those details. But the key point to realize is that without the blemish, the Kohen who is given this firstborn animal has a burden upon him to care for the animal until it develops a blemish. He certainly would be highly motivated to impose a blemish on it, but that is strictly forbidden. However, as is life, there are things that are forbidden, but people don't stand up to the temptation. That is by way of background information before we get into the topic of the Bechor. The second question, you can see that's featured at the bottom line, is a question Be'inyan Ne'ilas Sandal Shel Sham B'Yom Kippur, wearing shoes that are made of reed material. There's a material called rush that's used for making mats, and here we're going to be talking about that rush material being used to make shoes. What is the story with wearing that kind of shoe, a shoe made of sha'am? Within the first question, the first diamond, there are triangles that follow on the page, and they represent Shnei Lishonos b'mahu ha'she'elo sheshalu be'inyan heter b'choros. We're going to try to clarify what is the question that needed to be asked concerning heter b'choros. We have to say what heter b'choros means is the ruling that a blemish on an animal is an actual blemish, enabling it to be treated as a non-sacrifice and slaughtered and eaten outside the Beis HaMikdash. So now we turn to the Gemara, having the structure fairly clear, the Yom Kippur related topic being at the end of the Omid, and until that point we continue now with the bracketed section. Omar Rav Menashe bar Tachlifam Rav Amram Omar Rabbo bar Chana Shalu es Rebbe Lozer Zoken v'Yoshev b'Yeshiva. Without translating it literally, it refers to a sage that is a member of the Sanhedrin, of the High Court. So it's a person of great learning, great stature and significance. Tzorich litoil reshus lahatir b'choros o eino tzorch. Does he have to receive special permission for ruling on matters of Bechoros, as we mentioned before, blemishes concerning a firstborn animal? Or does the fact that he has already attained this high position, he is allowed to rule on it without receiving specific permission from the Nasi, the head of the Jewish people? The idea of getting reshus means getting permission to rule on these matters is a topic featured in Maseches Sanhedrin, where the Gemara says that a person, a chocham, can be matir a bechor if he received reshus from the nasi. One time, let's say, a license, then he can rule on bechor matters. Here, the question pertains specifically to a person that's already achieved very significant judicial status by virtue of the fact that he is a member of the High Court, but didn't receive specific permission for ruling on Bechoros. Does he have to receive that? So the Gemara now looks into what really is the question. What's underlying this question? My komebaya lahu. What is really bothering them? Hachi komebaya lahu. The following is the question. Now, here we have a triangle indicating this is the first of two versions. So, thusly is the real question. Ki hadi amar Rav Idi bar Ovin. As Rav Idi teaches Dovar Zeh, the issue of receiving reshus, receiving the license to rule on Bechor matters, hanichu lohem lebei nesia kedei lizgader bo. It is a matter of kedei lizgader means an issue of honor, of greatness, so that it's something that was left, this license allowance or license granting power is something that was retained by the Beis Hanasi, by the by the Nasi as the head of the Jewish people. He retained that license granting power as an issue of honor that was characteristic of that office, and therefore tzarich litol rishus as an honor to the Beis Hanasi. So whoever you are, you need to go to him to get permission. Or possibly, or possibly because of this individual's own distinction, being a member of the Sanhedrin of the High Court, he doesn't have to go to the Nasi and show him honor for this license. Omar Reb Tzadok ben Chalukah al Raglov the Omar. Reb Tzadok got up and he said, Ani Roisi, es Reb Yosi ben Zimro shezoken v'yoshi b'shiva hoya, that this Reb Yosi ben Zimro, whose name we double underline because he will appear again, and we'd like to emphasize certain repeat aspects in Gemara structures. So Reb Tzadok tells us that he saw Reb Yosi, who was a zoken v'yoshi b'shiva, the Omar b'mala mezikenoi shel zeh, and he stood in front of the grandfather of the current Nasi, the Notal Rishus Lahatir Bechoros. And we dashed underline Notal Rishus. That's the main point here. He had all these qualifications, and yet Rabbi Yossi ben Zimmer, with all his qualifications, as Zokin Goshi B'Shiva, he sought the license from the Nasi of his generation. Omar lei Rabbi Abba. So Rabbi Abba turns to Rabbi Tzadok. Notice how we dashed underline their names in a similar fashion so you can create a connection between them. Lo kach hoya maisa. That was not the incident. You know, as if you are quoting a story involving Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, that wasn't it. Elo kach hoya maisa. The following was the incident. Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra koyin hoya. He himself was a koyin. The hachi komebaya lei, and the following is the question: Halacha k'Rebbi Meir? Do we say the halacha is like Rebbi Meir, and we'll see what that is, and then at the middle of the line, oy dilma, or possibly a second possibility that the halacha is like Rav Shimon Gamliel. So let's go over this. Do we say the halacha is like Rebbi Meir? Literally, a person who is under suspicion regarding a particular matter. So, once he is suspect in a particular matter, he can never serve as a judge nor a witness regarding cases concerning that issue. Now that's a bit general, so let us get more specific. Kaihanim are themselves suspect on imposing blemishes on firstborn animals. As we indicated in our introductory remarks, nowadays there's no Beis Hamikdash. It's a pain, it's a burden to care for it until a blemish sets in by itself. So Kohanim are suspect of imposing blemishes in a proactive fashion. So once that suspicion falls upon a Kohen regarding Bechoros that he is given, can he rule concerning Bechoros in general? So according to Rabbi Meir, once you are suspect within that realm, as we just described, the Kohen is suspect within the realm of imposing mumen to animals that he personally received, that disqualifies him in general from the entire realm of judgment concerning blemishes, establishing blemishes as ruling on blemishes in animals in general, of firstborn animals as being permanent or not. Only a permanent blemish would be sufficient for allowing the animal to be slaughtered and eaten nowadays. O Dilma, halach Reb Shimon Gamliel Diomar Ne'emon hu al shel chavero ve'eino ne'emon al shel atzmo. Reb Shimon Gamliel has a much more lenient approach and says that A Kohen is not believed regarding his own animal to rule on the animal that he was given, a firstborn animal, saying, yes, this is a blemish, and hence I can go ahead and slaughter my animal. However, he's Namon al Shel Chavero. If someone else has a firstborn male animal, and it's not going to this particular Kohen, it's in the hands of another Kohen, or the person is going to give it to one other Kohen, so then this particular Kohen can rule on the blemish. Uposhat le, and the answer that was given to the question was Halach Rav Shlomo Gamliel, the more lenient approach that a Kohen can rule on someone else's bechor and its blemish. The brackets end here, indicating that now we come to the topic that we were waiting for as far as the general sugya is concerned, the Inuyim of Yom Kippur, and here we talk about the shoe, and on the side, under our nosei, Ne'ilas Asandal, Mahu Lotzeis Yom Kippur, Bekisuye Raglayim Anasim Michomarim Shonim. The Gemara will discuss walking out on Yom Kippur with different feet coverings. What's the story? So, V'su Kome Bayalahu, and further they asked in front of Rebbe Elazar, Mahu Lotzeis Besandal Shel, we continue at the top of Amid Beis, Sha'am, a sandal Shel Sham B'Yom HaKippurim. And as we said before in our introduction, can one wear rush reed shoes on Yom Kippur? We mentioned, of course, when we learned the Mishnah, that Yom Kippur is prohibited in 5 inuyim. In other words, one must abstain from 5 different areas, 5 different things, including which is wearing shoes. Does this sandal shel sham fall under the category of a shoe? Before we continue, on the side we have a nosei, we call it hemshech. This is just an introductory remark of a continuation nature with a mivneh structural note. Ma'u lotzeis b'sandal shel sham, sug shel knei suf. Knei suf is the reed material we referred to before, and we will discuss B'Yom Kippur and the Tainus Tzibor. Tainus Tzibor are fast days that were imposed as a result of a drought. As a result of a drought, so we in our Torah, Judaism, believe that through fasting and prayer that will arouse the mercy of the Almighty, and in order to accomplish that, so like on Yom Kippur, we abstain from different things. A fast, as its name implies, no eating, no drinking, and amongst the other practices, and this is featured in Maseches Tainus, you find shoe removal. We have a structural note. There's a mivneh, ve'amino le. What we'll see in the Gemara is testimony about one of these days, and then a question concerning the other kind of day. So the triangle with the point facing up has the question concerning B'Tainus Tzibur Mai. In other words, after stating testimony regarding Yom Kippur, what about on a public fast day? And the second stage of the Gemara has testimony concerning a public fast day, with the question then, what about on Yom Kippur Mai? Let's turn to the Gemara. So the question that we saw so far concerned the sandal shel sham Yom Kippur. Omad, we're continuing at the top line of the Gemara. Number 1, Omar Rabbi Yitzchok Bar Nachmeni al Raglov. Rabbi Yitzchok stood up. The Omar Ani Roisi. That's Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Shiyotza b'sandal shel sham b'Yom Kippurim. I saw Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi walking out with this kind of shoe on Yom Kippur, so it must be okay. V'amino le, and I asked him, B'Tainus Tzibur Mai, what would be with regard to the sandal shel sham regarding the public fast days, those days of fast imposed as a result of droughts. Omar Le lo shna, and he responded, there's no difference. Just like Yom Kippur, it's allowed, so too on the Tainis Tzibur it would be allowed. Omar Rabba bar Chana, Ani Roishis Rebbe Lozer de Ninveh. I saw Rebbe Lozer from the city of Ninveh. Sheyotza b'sandos sham b'Tainis Tzibur. I saw him walking out on a public fast day wearing the sandals of Shalom. V'amin olei, and I asked him, B'yom HaKippurim, what would the din be with regard to Yom Kippur? Omar le lo shna, and he said, there's no difference, it's okay. Rav Yehuda nofik b'dehitni, Abaye nofik b'dehutzi, Rava nofik b'divli. Three different stories. Rav Yehuda went out wearing hitni shoes. Hitni is a type of sha'am, type of reed. Abaye walked out wearing hutzi, is a type of shoe made of palm leaves. And Rava went out with divli. Divli is a type of grass, a shoe that's woven together using that type of grass. Nowadays, you find common practice, people wearing plastic shoes. I think there's a company called Crocs, and you find people wearing cloth sneakers. So these are all materials that don't come under the Yom Kippur restriction, which we have become familiar with is a leather type shoe. But the Gemara doesn't spell that information out. It tells you, it does give you all kinds of alternative materials that don't constitute the classic definition of a sandal or a minol. Another illustration: Rabba bar Rav Huna korach sudra akarei v'nofik. A korach is to wrap around his foot, akare, around his foot, sudra. Sudra is a cloth. Sudra, and often is a reference to a turban type of head covering made of cloth. He would wrap that around his feet and walk with that. Mosiv Rami bar Chama. So Rami raises the following question. This source, it's short, but there's a lot of information in it. The source opens with a Shabbos discussion, and at the end of the source there's a reference to Yom Kippur. The source describes a person who is a leg amputee, and he has some type of device. Now, it's very hard to commit oneself to an actual pshat. There's a very intense discussion found in the Tosfos that quotes Rashi, who speaks about the kav of a kiteah elsewhere, and Tosfos offers his own approach to it. As far as Rashi is concerned, it's a type of prosthetic leg or prosthetic foot. The amputee has his his foot cut off from, let's say, the ankle down, and there's a prosthetic made for him. That's the kaf. The Tosfos has, as we say, a different pshat. One of the pshatim might involve something along the lines of crutches. Whatever the case is, the source itself refers to the item as a kav. So the source reads hakiteah. The kiteah is an amputee. Yotze b'kav shelo. He can go out with it on Shabbos. Naturally, Shabbos in general is restricted from carrying items from one domain to another. However, one is allowed to wear his clothing, obviously. That's not called an act of hotzah, carrying, of transferring an article's location from one place to another. That's called wearing clothing, not moving items. So the kav of the kiteah, as far as Rabbi Meir is concerned, that falls under the category of something you can wear, and there's no fear of it falling off, and you're coming to carry it. Rabbi Yossi Oser. Rabbi Yossi restricts. There's a Rashi that appears on the fourth line from the top. Rabbi Yossi Oser, Kos Salka Daitoch. That means at this point our thinking is Kosover Lav Minalhu. He is of the opinion, and at this point in the Gemara, that doesn't mean it's the final explanation, but the thinking is at this point that it doesn't constitute a shoe. It's not something that everyone needs. Now, let's go back into the Gemara. The Toni Allah, and concerning the Kav of the Kitea, it is taught the Shavin, there is agreement. That means Rav Yossi agrees, She'oser Lotzeis Boy B'Yom HaKippurim. That it's forbidden to wear this on Yom Kippur. Now, if you focus on Rav Yossi, for example, here you have something that's not a shoe, it's not a minol, and still it's Oser. Well, if that's the case, then the same thing should apply to the reed shoe, the sha'am shoe that we described before. So that's the question. In simple terms, before we saw a heter permission granted for the sandal sham. Here we have a Taneg source that from the Kav and the Kitea, also for him on Yom Kippur. So we see that even a non-formal minol or sandal is likewise forbidden. How do we get out of this? So we have diamonds, and on the side, under our Mivneh heading, we have Abaye and Rava. These are Deos Lahazbir HaMoker. Hadikotoni, the Lukuliyamo Kitea Osulotses Yom Kippur Shebekav. So we have to explain the source and preserve our original Gemara. So we have two approaches. Omar Abaye. Hasam deis be ksisin umishum ta'anug. Abaye says the Yom Kippur problem is something specific to the kav of the kitea because it has pads in it. Ksisin are pieces of material, cloth, that soften the interior of this where he puts his foot, and it's also because it gives pleasure. Ta'anug. Ta'anug would be the undoing of Inui. Inui is the order of the day with regard to Yom Kippur. One's supposed to experience discomfort, abstention, and the problem of the kav is the pads. Well, Omar Le Rava. Rava is not happy with this explanation. You can see we have a long question which leads up to Rava's own answer. Omar Le Rava has three questions. Number one, the ilav monahu, if it's basically not a shoe, ksisin mashvile mona, do the pads make it into a shoe? Theo, kol tanig delav minolhu, beyom kipura, mi oser. Pleasures that are not specifically shoe related. Just because you experience something pleasant on Yom Kippur, mi oser, is that something that's forbidden? The whole Rabbo ba Ravuna have a korach sudra al karev enofik. Rabbo wrapped his foot in cloth. It might very well have been a comfortable cloth. It might have been soft and what have you. And he walked out with it on Yom Kippur. So that Yom Kippur is not it's not a day that we ban being comfortable. We ban wearing shoes. But something's got to be classified as a minol. It's got to be not just translated. And we've said many, many times in Gemara markings, beware of translations. Because a minol is a specific type of footgear. As we saw before, reed material wrapped in cloth, all kinds of, what else did we see? We saw palm leaf shoes or grass woven shoes. They were all okay because they were not a minol. Yom Kippur is not a day that is prohibited in Tanug. It's a day that's prohibited in Chafov, is Tumah that had taken place earlier at the events described in Pasuk Chaf Beis as a minol. These alternative materials, they might be comfortable. They're not, are out of order. Rava Omar, a second approach. Explanation. a third objection, Midiktoni Seifa, the Seifa of that Shabbos source says, and we put a frame around, this is a continuation of the source we saw above, it says, Im yesh lo beis kibul ksisin tomei, if the kav of the kitea is carved out, beis kibul means at a receptacle area, it's carved out with pads placed in that carving, so if it has a beis kibul for holding pads, it is subject to kabolas tuma. A vessel, we'll assume it's made of wood. A wood vessel is not mekabel tuma if it's a smooth vessel without any receptacle area. So where does the source address the issue of pads? In the Seifa. Mechlal de Reisha, we could infer from this that the earlier part of the source, the part that we were dealing with, Lav b'di'is leik sisin askinon. At that point, there were no pads. The issue of pads, the presence of pads, comes in the latter part of the source. But the first part of the source, on which we have the Yom Kippur comment made, there were no pads. Contrary to Abaye's explanation, Elo Omar Rava, Rava comes up with his own explanation. Li'olam dekuli almo minol hu. Everyone will agree that it is a minol. The kav of the kitea is classified as a minol. Therefore, on Yom Kippur, it's clearly osir. That's in contrast to the hitni and the hutzah, the different materials we saw above. Those are not minols, and therefore they are allowed on Yom Kippur. We alluded to this before, and we see this again over here, that in order to be classified as a minol, it would have to be made of specific material, and we can take an educated guess. It would have to be a leather type material, and if that's the case, then you'd have to look into commentaries, but the kav of the kitea is very, very likely something that's covered in leather. That we're stepping a little bit beyond the purview of our Gemara, but it makes it a little easier if we can accept those lines of definition. You will see this discussed in the Rishonim right here on the page. You have the Tosfos and the Tosfos Rishonim. They they introduce the leather factor in their discussion. But as far as Rav is concerned, the kav of the kitea falls under the minol category. Hence, everyone agrees that on Yom Kippur it's forbidden. The other materials that we mentioned, including sham, are not minol materials, and therefore they're allowed. Well, b'Shabbos b'ha pligi, and as far as Shabbos is concerned, we saw a machloikes concerning the kav of the kitea. More savar gazrino dilma mishtamid v'osu dal amos. Rabbi Yossi makes a gzeira. He imposes a restriction, fear that it might slip off, and he'll forget that it's Shabbos and end up carrying it 4 amos in Rishus Harabim. Umor savar lo gazrinon, and Reb Meir does not impose such a restriction. He's not fearful of that happening. Before we continue with the next section of Gemara, we glance at the side. We have a topic heading in Osei, Tinoikos, children or infants. Children will say young children. Ma dinom legabi ho'inuyim diyom kippur. What is the law with respect to inuyim and tinokos? Tinokos is a term referring to young children. So our Gemara. Tonu Rabbanan. Tinoikos mutaron bekulan chutz mineilas hasandal. Young children are not restricted by the inuyim of Yom Kippur, eating, drinking, sichos, smearing lotions on them, washing, the rechitza. Those are not binding with regard to young children. The exception being wearing of shoes. The Gemara asks, "My shno ni'ilas hasandal." Let's just start the Gemara again, reading the source. Tonu Rabbanan. The Tanaic source says, "Tinokos mutaron bekulan." Chutz mini'ilas hasandal. Young children are allowed with regard to all of the inuyim, with the exception of the shoe issue. My shno ni'ilas hasandal. What's different? The Gemara asks, why is the shoe to be treated any differently? Gamri, because people will say, Inshi avdu lei. Other people, adults, put the shoes on. And Rashi points out that there is a prohibition from the Torah that adults should not do to children that which is osur. For example, it's not allowed for one to take some unkosher meat and feed it to a child. There's a separate discussion in the Shas. What if you see a child doing something that for an adult would be prohibited? Does one have to intervene? But to proactively do something to a child that is forbidden to, one is not allowed to do that. So the thinking right now is, well, the shoe, why would a child not be allowed to wear a shoe on Yom Kippur? Because people say others put the shoe on the child, and that's not allowed. It's not allowed for adults to do that which is prohibited, and then to do that for the child. Well, by the same token, then Hanoch Nami Amri Inshi Avdulei. The others, let's say the kid is walking around with some lotion smeared on him, or the kid is freshly bathed. Won't people say that others did that for him, and yet we make a distinction? So the Gemara points out, Rechitza v'sicha, as far as bathing and lotions are concerned, Amar, people say me'esmol avdilei. They did that for him yesterday. Well, Sandal Nami Amar me'esmol avdilei. Well, regarding the shoe, couldn't the same thing be said? And if you're going to allow Rechitza and sicha based on this idea that people say it was done for him, for the child, of the day before, so the same could be said about the shoes. The Gemara says no. Sandal lo efsher de me'esmol avdilei. As far as the shoe is concerned, it can't be that people will say it was done the day before and the kid slept in his shoes. The Amar Shmuel has the following teaching. Hi man the boy limitam taimo the mitusa. If a person wants to have a taste of death, V'sayim misani v'ligli, let him put on shoes and go to sleep. Sleep with your shoes on. So that the idea of having the shoes on from the day before is totally ruled out. The Gemara asks, though, what did we say with regard to Rechitza and Sicha? We said that people will think it was done from the day before, indicating to us that to do it straight out on Yom Kippur itself, that wouldn't be allowed. But that's not true. The source that we read above says Tinoikus mutorin bekulan. That would mean that it is allowed straight out on Yom Kippur day itself. So if that's the case, so what's the difference between the other inuyim and the shoes? Ella. Third stage of trying to answer this, and this is a long answer. We have a long answer marking. Elo hanoch delav revisayu gozru b'hu rabbanan. Hanoch means these things, but it's a reference to the shoes. The matter of the shoes, which is not something upon which the child's development depends. Revisayu means growth, development. The shoes are not a necessary or immediate requirement for a child's growth. And as a result of that, Gozru B'hu Rabbanan, the Rabbanan imposed a restriction on them. It's not such a critical matter. Hanoch the Revisayuhu, the other matters, bathing, eating, drinking, lotions, which is important for the child's development, Lo Gozru B'hu Rabbanan. The Rabbanan did not impose any restrictions. The Amar Abaye testifies, Omrli Aim, my aim, the woman that raised me, she says, Revise Dianuka, the growth of a child, and he presents this in 3 stages. What is necessary for a child's welfare? So, Revise Dianuka, Maya Chamimi Umashcha, warm water for washing, for bathing, and mashcha oils as a lotion. Called the child gets a little older, Biasa B'kuscha. Best thing to feed him is an egg with kusa. Kusa is a known food item, dish that's featured in the Shas. So, Beasa, an egg with kuscha, very good for child development. And Godel Porta, kid gets a little older, and he has emotional needs, like as many of you are familiar with. Kids like to break things, like to take things apart. So, and it's not advisable to give him your expensive electronic equipment for venting his psychological requirements. So you know what? Tavuri money. Tavuri are broken vessels. Give the child items that are already cracked and broken to break further. It's good for him. Kiha the Rabba, who had a child, Zovin Luhu Moni Gazizi de Pachra Livnei, who Misprilu, he would actually buy at very low cost cracked pottery, give it to his child to smash further. So we've explained so far then why, with regard to shoes, since it's not something that's necessary for the child's daily welfare, can go a day without wearing shoes, therefore we do impose this rabbinic restriction. The other matters that are essential for the child's daily welfare, so no rabbinic restriction was imposed. As we go on in the Gemara, we see a quote from the Mishnah, Melech Vakala Yurchatzu Es Pereim, on the side of the Gemara. We note under our topic heading, Ma Dinam Shel, what is the law regarding Melech Vakala, a king, and a newlywed bride, Binyan Rechitza B'Yom Kippur, regarding bathing on Yom Kippur. And another topic, Chaya B'Neilas Hasana. Chaya is a woman who recently gave birth, and what is the din regarding her wearing of shoes? The Gemara, Hamelech v'Hakala Yurchatzu Es Penehem. Masnisin Moni. Our Mishnah is in accordance with which Tanaic authority? In other words, who is the Tana that authored our Mishnah? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Hananya ben Shradion, he. It's in accordance with Hananya ben Shradion, the Sanya, and we have the following source in which we see a Machlokes Tanoim, and Rabbi Hananya is featured. Hamelech v'Hakala lo yirchatzu es panehem. The Tanakama objects to their washing their faces. Hananya ben Shradion Omer, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. He quotes Rabbi Eliezer saying, Hamelech v'Hakala yirchatzu es panehem. They are entitled to washing their faces. A second section of this source deals with the other topic we mentioned before. Hachaya lo tinol es asano, Reb Chaim ben Shradion Omer Mishum Reb Lezer, Hachaya tinol es asano machlokes, regarding the chaya, the woman who just gave birth, and with regard to her wearing of shoes. And now the Gemara will explain each one of the points. You can see we've used a double underline to highlight the reference to the Melech and the Kala, and the second line from the bottom, the Gemara will refer to the Chaya. Here we're interested in explanations. Melech my taima. What's the basis of allowing a king to wash on Yom Kippur? Mishum d'chsiv, the pasuk says, Melech b'yafyo sechazeno inecha. A king needs to be seen in his beauty all times. So even on Yom Kippur, when people see the king, they have to see him looking fine. And that is achieved by his washing his face. Kalo mai taima. Why the newly married woman is she entitled to wash her face? Kedei shelo tizgan al baila, so that she doesn't appear uncomely in her new husband's eyes. she should appear attractive to him, and that again necessitates the washing of her face, even if it's Yom Kippur. Omar le Rav Reb Chia Kala ad Kama. So Rav asked Reb Chia the status of being a Kala. How long is that? Omar le Kedisanya. So Reb Chia answered Rav. He answered Rav, who was Reb Chia's nephew. He answered him as is taught in the following Tanaic source. Rashi gives more background to the source, but for our purposes, we want to get to the main points. We go right into the Gemara. It says, Ein moinin tachshitin min akala kol shloshim yom. The background to the sources. We said Rashi points out deals with a woman who recently got married, but she was also in a state of mourning. So even though she's in a state of mourning, we don't withhold from her cosmetics for a period of 30 days, indicating that if the mourning period is within the 30 days, Rashi explained that the case was on their wedding night, so she lost her parent. So the halach is that first she observes 7 days of the 7 joyous days related to her now getting married, and then she observes the mourning period. However, for 30 days, she is not to abstain from cosmetics. So we see that the kala status, the bride status, is for 30 days. And the hope being that after 30 days, so the husband has sufficiently bonded with his new wife so that these matters would not be so urgent anymore. Achayo tinol es hasandal, this we saw quoted above. And why? Why do we allow her, the woman who recently gave birth, to wear shoes on Yom Kippur? Mishum tzina, because of cold. She's sensitive to experiencing a chill, and hence keeping the feet warm with a proper shoe is necessary. Omar Shmuel. Shmuel points out that if a person finds himself in a region where there are scorpions, then it's mutter for everyone to wear shoes on Yom Kippur. So we see that protection from imminent danger is a sufficient license for wearing shoes on Yom Kippur. At this point, we have a general topic heading. We call this a Nosei Klali, and it lasts till Pei Aleph Amud Aleph. So that here we are on Ayin Ches Amud Beis, realizing that there's going to be a lengthy discussion that will preoccupy the Gemara till Ayin Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, and that involves Shiurei Achila Ushtia, quantities with regard to eating and drinking, quantities of food, quantities of beverage, and we're leaving it general as our topic heading indicates. This is simply a general title. Immediately in our Gemara we'll see triangles, and they represent, and we see under our Mivneh heading, She'elos Birur, questions that are designed to clarify Be'inyan Shiurim, clarify matters concerning quantities. Number 1, we'll see She'elas Rav Papa Lagabi Koseves Yom Kippur. Rav Papa will ask a question regarding the Koseves, the date quantity of food which would constitute a Yom Kippur violation if one ate such an amount. And a second question will be not Yom Kippur related, but related to the realm of defilement, where it is said that etzem kisora, a bone the size of a barley grain, communicates tumah. Hagemara tasbir lomo kol echad eino she'el she'elas chaver. The Gemara will point out why Rav Papa, who asked about the koseves of Yom Kippur, doesn't ask about the etzem kisora, and why Rav Ashi, who asks about the etzem kisora, he is not troubled by the koseves on Yom Kippur question. the Gemara, the bottom line, the Mishnah went on to say, Kamoa ukegar inasa. We're not going to translate it now because this is something that is noted by Rashi later on, but the quantity of food that generates a Yom Kippur violation would be the amount of food equivalent to a large date. The Mishnah makes reference to a large date and the pit. Boy Rav Papa. Rav Papa asks, we continue at the top of Daf Ayin Tes, Omid Aleph, Kekaiseves She'omru. The Mishnah that spoke about a date quantity, begarinasa or below garinasa, is that a date with the pit in it or without the pit in it? Now you might jump out of your chair and say, what do you mean? The Mishnah said very clearly it's a date with its pit. So Rashi explains, no, you could read the Mishnah, and this is what our question is. When the Mishnah makes reference to the pit, is the Mishnah saying that the quantity of food that generates a Yom Kippur violation would be the size of the date or the size of its pit? In other words, date or pit, they're basically the same amount. Or is it the amount of food that would equal the date and its pit? Not date or the pit, but rather the date and the pit. So that was Rav Papa's question. The Kosevis quantity mentioned in the Mishnah, is it an amount including the pit or not? Boy Ravashi, Etzem Kisor, Ravashi asked regarding the bone, the size of a barley grain. When we speak about a barley grain, beklipasa or below klipasa, belecha or bevesh, there are two questions there that need clarification. Two issues. Is the barley grain spoken about with the peel on it, the klipa, the shell around the barley grain, or without that peel? Is it talking about a fresh barley grain? A fresh one is larger than a dried out one, which would have shrunken. Be a veshi. Veshi is the dried one. So what amount of bone material would communicate tumah? Ravashi lo mibaya lehadra Papa. Ravashi, who questioned about the barley grain, he wasn't bothered by the issue of the date quantity. For him, it was clear because gasa itmar. The Mishnah spoke about a keseves hagas, a large one, called kama de gasa. Anything that increases quantity is what's self-understood. So that as far as Rav Ashi is concerned, it's clear to him that since the Mishnah made reference to a large date, its intention was it's the date and the pit. That's the quantity of food that would be if one eats it, would be a violation of Yom Kippur. Rav Papa lo mibayale hadu Rav Ashi. Rav Papa found no reason to ask Rav Ashi's question because as far as Rav Papa is concerned, the other situations, we want to talk about the lecha with the peel, without the peel, those are clear situations for him. Lecha, a fresh barley grain, isn't called a seora, it's called shiboles mikri. Mikri is it's called shiboles, not seora. And the halacha that we are talking about is etzem kisaoira. Shalom liklibasa, a peeled barley grain, ushla mikri, it's called ushla, it's not called seoira. Therefore, we can discount peeled and fresh. What are we left with? A dried barley grain with the peel still on it. That is the quantity referred to when we say etzem kisaora. It's dried with the peel still on. At this point, we want to remind you that if you wish to be in touch with us, we can be reached at gmarkings@gmail.com. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.